We are joined right now by a CBS Sports college basketball insider, host of College Hoops Today podcast. He will serve as a sideline reporter for the first 4 broadcast coverage in Dayton. That is tomorrow and Wednesday on True TV. We do it every single year at this time. He is Jon Rothstein. Jon, what's going on? How are you?
Never better, Jim. Great to be with you. This is March.
This is March. You know it. So, Jon, really quickly, every year this time, somebody comes out of Selection Sunday. Somebody is bent every year, no matter. This year is no different. Generally speaking, how do you think the committee did, though, this time around?
Really, really well. You know, I had 67 of the 68 teams in the bracket correctly. The one team that I did not obviously get correctly was Rutgers. I had Rutgers in and Nevada out, but no real complaints from my perspective with the way the bracket came out in the NCAA tournament. I think there are a couple of things to keep an eye on. First off, when you look at Houston in the Midwest region, which we'll get to the names of my regions in a second, but that is the region of guard play. You have a situation, if you're Kelvin Sampson and the Cougars, where if you win your first game, you could be facing a game in the round of 32 against Auburn in Birmingham. That is the equivalent of playing a road game to get to the second weekend. And another thing that, again, I don't think got a lot of attention was the fact that Duke, who is the 5 seed in the East region, which I'm calling the region of misdirection, is in a situation where if it can beat Oral Roberts and beat a deflated Tennessee team who just lost to Kai Ziegler, their point guard, in the past couple of weeks, Duke could go to Madison Square Garden for the Sweet 16. Cameron Indoor Stadium North, Jim, you better believe it.
No doubt about that, Jon. But then Oral Roberts is no joke, and Duke is red hot. Jon Rothstein joining us. Jon, go back to Houston for a minute. They're a 1 seed, and they've got a chance to play for a natty in their hometown. You're right. Early on, the committee did them no favors. But there is the question of Marcus Sasser's health. What is his status, and do you see them making a deep run if he's not near 100%?
If he's not near 100%, I think they'll be tested against either Iowa or Auburn in the round of 32. I spoke to the Houston staff this morning. I got no indication whatsoever that there would be a major issue for Marcus Sasser. I'm going to monitor that, obviously, as we get closer to the first round of the NCAA tournament. But we are looking at a scenario, though, this year, Jim, with certain teams in the bracket where it's a Final Four or bust type scenario. Now, what do I mean by that? Houston has its most talented team under Kelvin Sampson. The Final Four is in Houston. Anything less than an appearance in the Final Four will be a disappointment for the Cougars. Look at Purdue. Purdue has the most dominant force that I've ever covered at the center position in college basketball in Zach Edey, who more and more looks like a collegiate version of Yao Ming with the way that he can carve out space on the low block. But let's look at the landscape of college basketball. It's as wide open as it's been in the last several years. And Jim, think about the heartache that Purdue's basketball program has endured over the last half decade. In 2018, you have a team that's good enough to go to a Final Four. Isaac Haas suffers an elbow injury. You lose to Texas Tech in the Sweet 16. 2019, you have a lead in hand late against the Virginia Cavaliers in the Elite Eight. We know what happened there. Purdue loses in overtime. Virginia goes on and wins a national championship. Then last year, you have a team with Zach Edey, with Travion Williams, with Jaden Ivey, a lottery pick, and you lose to St. Peter's in the Sweet 16. Given the fact they have Zach Edey, given the fact that Purdue hasn't been to a Final Four since 1980, Purdue, like Houston, in a Final Four or bust type scenario.
No doubt. Final Four or bust, especially for Purdue. Jon Rothstein joining us. Jon, what about the defending champs, Kansas? They're a 1. They did get hammered by Texas in the Big 12 tourney. They lost to the Longhorns twice, in fact, in the past week. Then you've got Bill Self, who was out due to that medical procedure. He is expected back. What are you expecting from the Jayhawks this time around?
Well, that is a loaded region out west, and I have called it the region of brands because, Jim, think about the top seeds in the West region. Kansas, 1 seed, defending national champion. UCLA, 2 seed. Their brand speaks for itself. Gonzaga's the 3, UConn's the 4. All 4 of the top seeds in the West region have played in the Final Four in the last decade. Therefore, the West region, the region of brands.
Jon Rothstein joining us. John, I had UCLA a couple of weeks back now, but I hit them to win the whole thing. And then, of course, you have the season-ending Achilles injury to Jalen Clark. How devastating a loss is that for them? And can they still make a deep run as a 2 out of the West without him?
UCLA doesn't have what it had, but it still has enough to get to a Final Four if Adem Bona is back as UCLA starting center. And, Jim, I got to tell you, I came away after watching Saturday night's Pac-12 tournament title game against Arizona more impressed with UCLA than I did Arizona, because think about the logistics. UCLA did not have, obviously, Jalen Clark or Adem Bona. The 2 5-men for UCLA, Kenny Nwuba and Mac Etienne, were fouled out of the game with 6 or 7 minutes left, and the Bruins still should have won the game. They had a terrible night offensively. David Singleton didn't score a point in the game. Mick Cronin proved in that game that, again, UCLA is going to be a player in this thing, regardless of whether or not it's at full strength. And I stand by what I said. If you have Adem Bona back at the 5 to anchor that defense, UCLA still has enough to go to a Final Four for the second time in 3 years.
I like hearing that from you, John. I like hearing that from you, and I agree with you. They're not what they were a couple of weeks back, but they might be enough to get to that Final Four. So, John, what about a Cinderella? Everybody's always looking for a Cinderella. Do you see one or two this year that you'd point out?
Well, I define Cinderellas into 2 different layers. Do we want an off-the-radar power conference team that can make a run, or do you want a traditional Cinderella from a mid-major conference?
Yes.
Okay, well, let's go with Furman, out of the region of opportunity. Furman's going to be matched up with Virginia. Virginia's complete dynamic changed, when Ben Vanderplas was lost for the season. Now, why does that change Virginia without Ben Vanderplas? Now, all of a sudden, Virginia does not have somebody in the front court that can step out and go over the top of defenses. This really hurt them against Duke in the ACC tournament. And if you have not watched Furman over the last couple of years, you are missing one of the great offensive mid-major programs in America. Furman became a team on the map in the fall of 2018 when they won a bye game at Villanova after Villanova won the national championship. They have a dynamic guard in Mike Bothwell, a terrific coach in Bob Ritchie. Furman is one to keep an eye on against Virginia in the round of 64.
By the way, I already bet them for the first round. I agree with you, Jon Rothstein, breaking it all down. Hey, John, what do you make of the job that Penny Hardaway did with Memphis this season, and do you see them doing any damage this month?
Far and away the best coaching job that Penny Hardaway has done since he's taken the Memphis job. We have seen so much talent go through Memphis the past couple of years. James Wiseman, Precious Achiuwa, so many different players who came in with such pedigree in terms of high school recruiting and what they were ranked. Memphis does not have as much talent as it's had in previous years under Penny Hardaway, but that doesn't matter because this is a better basketball team. Achiuwa, Jalen Duren, James Wiseman all obviously came with massive, massive expectations, but the combination of the experience and the nastiness of DeAndre Williams up front has been really, really impressive for Memphis. And one thing I always look at as soon as the bracket comes out is what vulnerable top seed could have a difficult game in the round of 32. Purdue's 2 freshman guards, Fletcher Lawyer, Braden Smith, have struggled with pressure for the last month. We saw it down the stretch in the Big Ten tournament title game on CBS against Penn State. Memphis, if it can get by Florida Atlantic, could really pose a difficult matchup for Purdue in the round of 32.
And that would be disastrous for Purdue if it were to go that way. Hey, John, I know you well enough to know you will tell me what I need to hear as opposed to what I want to hear. I would take it no other way. But what do you think about my 14th seeded UCSB Gauchos? How tough are they in against a 3 seed in Baylor coming out of the rugged Big 12?
They're pushing a boulder up a hill, and I'm going to tell you why. If you are going to be in a situation where you are going to upset a power conference team, you need to have all hands on deck. Now, one thing that a lot of people aren't really as privy to is that Santa Barbara's depth took a major hit in the past couple of weeks because 2 key pieces, Ajari Sani and Coat Keat, are out for the season. It's going to be really difficult for Joe Pasternak to go blow for blow with a Baylor team that I think is good enough to get to a Final Four, even though they come in with back-to-back losses to Iowa State. But here's another thing. Santa Barbara has one of the best guards in the tournament that nobody knows about in A.J. Mitchell, averaged 24 points per game in the Big West tournament. And Santa Barbara also has several players who were recruited to play at the high major level at a high school. Look at the front court for the Gauchos. Miles Norris started his career at Oregon. Andre Kelly started his career at Cal. And Josh Pierre-Louis on the wing started his career at Temple. The Gauchos won't be intimidated, but I think it's going to be a really, really tall task to ask them to beat Baylor without two key pieces who they lost in the last month, Jari Sani and Cote Keat.
You are a machine, Jon Rothstein. Before I let you go, I know you're dialed in also to the coaching carousel. Georgetown needs a coach. St. John's needs a coach. Texas Tech needs a coach. And seemingly, they're all looking at Rick Pitino. Do you think that Pitino will take one of those gigs? And if so, which one?
Rick Pitino is obviously going to coach Iona through this week, and then, we're going to see what transpires after that. There is serious desperation right now for St. John's to go and hire Rick Pitino. And out of the three schools you've mentioned, that's the one that makes the most sense and aligns in the most sense. But I'll say this, Jim. When you think about the fact that St. John's has not won an NCAA tournament game since 2000, and you think about the fact that that's 23 years ago, well, how long ago is that? Jay Wright was still the head coach at Hofstra. Rick Pitino being hired at St. John's could have the same type of impact in the Big East and New York City landscape as we saw in the early 90s when Pat Riley was hired by the New York Knicks. Right now, I know Texas Tech has shown interest in Rick Pitino. I know he's been linked to Georgetown, but I can tell you this. I expect discussions to be expedited whenever Iona is done playing. But before we get to that, Jim, Iona has to play against UConn in Albany later this week in a dream matchup in the round of 64. Dan Hurley has done an incredible job building UConn's program, but the Huskies in the last 2 years have not advanced out of the first round of the NCAA tournament. They lost to Maryland 2 years ago. They lost to New Mexico State last year. So there has been a buildup in UConn's program, which is, again, among the nation's elite, just to get through the round of 64. Well, who is standing in your way in the round of 64? Pound for pound, inch for inch, the best coach in the sport in Rick Pitino. Jim, where I come from, you just reach for your good friend John Daniels.
I'm telling you, John, if I were St. John's, I would do everything in my power to get Rick Pitino. Even at 70, the guy's still great. He's got energy. He can still get the job done. I would do everything I could. One last thought. You mentioned the Hurley family. John, I talked to Bobby Hurley a couple of weeks back on my podcast, and Arizona State had that huge half-court shot to beat Arizona. Where do you think Bobby's head's at? Do you think this is where he wants? Like, he told me, I'm great. I love it here. My family loves it here. Everything's fine. Do you feel like that's the case, or do you think that maybe he might be looking or somebody might be looking for him?
Well, it's time for Arizona State to understand, obviously, what it has. I mean, Arizona State is going to play in the NCAA tournament for the third time since 2018 under Bobby Hurley. This is obviously a program that's never been synonymous from a basketball perspective with Arizona and UCLA, and we've seen Arizona State really be rallied right now by the former Duke point guard. And here's the ironic thing. You have Arizona State now, Jim, coming into Dayton for the third time under Bobby Hurley. They're 1-1 in the first four. They're going to play Nevada coming up here in Dayton this week. That is an experienced team in the first four. It's an experienced program in the first four. And again, it's become a consistent threat for the NCAA tournament under Bobby Hurley.
So, John, who do you have cutting down the nets?
I've got Alabama. I've got Alabama over Gonzaga in the national title game, and I've got Texas and Duke rounding out the Final Four.
That should be awesome. He is a CBS Sports college basketball insider. It is indeed March. Jon Rothstein doing what he does this time of year and always. John, appreciate you so much. Great hit. Thank you for doing that.
Thanks, Jim. We sleep in May.
You got it. We sleep in May. This is March. We sleep in May.